Hi, Studio Recapped here. Today, we're going to talk about a movie called Don't Worry Darling in the thriller and mystery genres. Spoiler alert is on. Watch out and take care. You won't believe how much your support means. Thank you so much for your support. The movie begins by portraying the lives of families with happy and comfortable lives near the California desert. All of these families work for a company called Victory and live in a town with special conditions. Every morning, the husbands go to the headquarters located outside of the town, while the wives focus on housework and ballet practice. Their dance instructor's name was Shelley. The wives weren't allowed to ask questions about their husbands' jobs, and they weren't allowed to go to the headquarters either. The main characters of the story are a happy couple named Alice and Jack. They usually spend their time enjoying themselves and partying with their neighbors. Later, we meet one of Alice's best friends named Bunny. Occasionally, the town shakes a little. This makes Alice curious about whether these tremors are related to the company's activities or not, but Jack avoids answering her questions. One afternoon, after ballet class, Bunny and Alice see some men wearing red uniforms helping their new neighbors and talk about one of their friends named Margaret, who hadn't attended ballet class. Alice suddenly notices Margaret standing mysteriously in the yard of her house. While Alice is preparing dinner, she realizes that all the eggs in the carton are empty. A few days later, at a party at Shelley's house, Alice notices a song that she keeps humming, but she doesn't know what it is or where it came from in her mind. As she tries to replay a song in her head, she sees strange and bizarre images, but Bunny distracts her. Shelley and her husband Frank, who is the head of the Victory organization, give a speech to welcome the new neighbors. Suddenly, Margaret interrupts their speech. Margaret, as if she had uncovered some truths, tells everyone that Frank is forcing them to stay here. But a woman is quickly taken away by her husband, while everyone is surprised by her words. Frank tells everyone, "We are here to change the world by building a small, organized, and safe town." Alice, worried about Margaret, follows her. She realizes that Margaret's husband is giving her medication, while Margaret insists that she isn't feeling well. Margaret believed that they were hiding things in Victory Town. Then her husband, frustrated, shuts the door. Alice, confused, goes back to the party and sees Jack in Frank's room. They get closer to each other, and we see Frank standing with a smile, watching them. Alice notices Frank's presence but says nothing. The next day, when Alice is out shopping with her friends, they bring up Margaret's situation, and they all say that her behavior has become strange lately and that she seems to have lost her mind. Bunny emphasizes that Margaret broke the only rule she had to follow and left the town. In fact, Margaret and her son went deep into the desert. She had seen something, but when the others saw her, they couldn't find her son anymore. Margaret believed that they took her child from her as punishment. The women show no reaction to the shaking of the ground again. One of them asks, "Is it true that our husbands are making weapons?" But Bunny interrupts and says that our only duty is to support our husbands, and we shouldn't ask questions. From then on, Alice starts having strange dreams, and even the next day, she can't stop thinking about those events. She feels she needs some fresh air, so she gets on a trolley and goes for a ride. But instead of getting off at the mall, she doesn't, and heads toward the desert. The driver behaves very strangely with her. Suddenly, a plane appears in the sky, and it seems to be crashing. A plane had never flown over this area before. Alice wants to go toward the plane, thinking that someone might need help. But the bus driver refuses to take her there, saying he can't break the rules. But Alice gets off the bus without paying attention to the rules and heads toward the desert. Eventually, she reaches a hill surrounded by a winding road. After walking for a long time, she discovers a mysterious dome-shaped building. She asks for help, but no one answers. She gets closer to the building and places her hand on the glass walls. Suddenly, her body is shaken, and she's thrown backward. At the same time, disturbing and strange images flash through her mind. When Alice regains consciousness, she finds herself in her bed at home. She's very confused and scared. She heads to the kitchen and sees Jack cooking. It seems that when Jack returned home, Alice had already been brought back, but Alice doesn't know how this happened. Alice talks about plane crash. Jack says that never happened. Jack starts joking with his wife to distract her. The next day, Alice is cleaning the windows when the wall behind her starts moving. She gets scared, but suddenly the wall goes back to its place because it was just a figment of her imagination. At that moment, the phone rings. Margaret is on the other end and asks Alice, "Did you see it?" Then she says, "They're lying to us." Alice can't handle it and hangs up the phone. In next ballet class, Alice notices that her reflection in the mirror has turned into Margaret. Margaret starts mimicking Alice's movements, and suddenly, she presses her hand against the glass and starts banging her head on it. Alice screams in horror. Everyone looks at Alice in shock, thinking she's just having another hallucination. Worried, she rushes home and sees Margaret standing on top of her house, about to throw herself down. Alice hurries toward her, but she's stopped by the red-clad men. Alice tries to explain to Jack the things she has seen, but Jack doesn't believe her. He thinks Margaret just fell while cleaning the windows. Alice is determined to know the truth, so she asks Jack what exactly his job is. Jack gets angry, shouting that answering these questions could end their marriage, and tells Alice not to continue arguing. Alice tries to distract herself by watching TV, but a new hallucination hits her. She sees herself drowning in a pool. It feels just like the situation with the wall approaching her the day before. Suddenly, Alice finds herself in front of a window, as if she's trying to leave. The next morning, Alice is working in the kitchen when her hands, seemingly out of her control, start wrapping plastic around her face. After a few seconds, she is suffocating, but suddenly snaps out of it and tears the plastic off to save herself. Moments later, Dr. Collins arrives for her checkup. He diagnoses that the stress from seeing Margaret's death has been affecting Alice. When Alice tries to explain what really happened, Collins says that sometimes the mind can change reality due to grief and sorrow. The doctor prescribes some medication, but Jack and Alice refuse to take it, saying they don't need any drugs. Meanwhile, Alice notices that Collins has confidential files related to Margaret in his bag. She curiously begins asking the doctor questions. Collins claims that Margaret suffered from paranoia and mental health issues, which caused her husband to be unable to continue working peacefully. As a result, the couple was kicked out of Victory's care and sent elsewhere for help. After that, Collins leaves the house but forgets his bag. As soon as the doctor and Jack leave, Alice goes to grab the bag to steal the file. However, the doctor quickly realizes he forgot the bag and returns home. Alice hands it back to him. When Collins leaves, it's clear Alice managed to steal the file, but all the pages are blacked out. Alice burns the files in the fireplace and, while thinking about Margaret, drinks a beverage. Later, when she heads to the bathroom, still drinking, her mind starts to replay all those strange images again. This time, she sees the sweet moments of a couple hugging each other. When Jack comes home and plays music, Alice snaps back to reality, still in shock. Meanwhile, Jack enters the bathroom to check on her and asks if she wants to have children. Surprised and uninterested in having kids, Alice promises to think about it. That evening, the two of them go to an extravagant party hosted at a restaurant by Frank. We see Frank can't take his eyes off Alice, which freaks her out. When a dancer appears and performs, Alice is reminded of her mental images and tears start flowing. She asks Jack to go home, but Jack ignores her since Frank is about to take the stage to announce an important matter. To everyone's surprise, Frank asks Jack to join him and announces that Jack has been promoted. Everyone starts celebrating. Alice, upset, heads to the restroom, and more images of a couple come to her mind. Bunny arrives to check on Alice, asking if she's okay. Alice explains everything that has happened to Bunny, but Bunny angrily scolds her for breaking the rules. Bunny thinks Alice is acting like a child and ruining the big night meant to celebrate her husband's success. He asks Alice to pull herself together and be a good wife to her husband. Alice has no choice but to go back to her normal routine and try to accept everything, forgetting about the events that have happened. Jack arranges a dinner party at his house. Frank and Shelley also attend. While Alice is busy cooking in the kitchen, Frank walks over to tell her that she has captivated him. Frank claims that he always wanted someone to challenge him, because only under pressure can great men change history. He then says that he hopes Alice continues her efforts in the future. During dinner, Alice decides to sit on the host's chair right across from Frank instead of Jack. When the conversation starts, Alice interrupts everyone and asks the guests about their lives before coming to see. She then points out how several stories among the neighbors are common and repetitive. It's as if they've been told to remember these stories, because they want them to forget the real stories of their lives, exactly like what happened to Margaret. Jack tries to quiet Alice, but Frank tells him to let her continue. Alice talks about everything she sees and how Frank lies to everyone to create the world he wants, calling him out and insulting him. Frank calmly tells everyone that Alice is suffering from the same mental illness that Margaret went through. He even accuses Alice of having gone into his bedroom. Everyone is upset, and Jack is very angry. Shelley scolds Alice for lying and insulting her husband and decides to leave. All the guests follow her out of the house. When Jack leaves the table, Frank tells Alice, "I expected more from you," making her angrier before leaving. Jack accuses his wife of trying to ruin party. Alice immediately goes to Jack to tell him it wasn't like that. Jack was more important to her than life and victory. Alice insists that they must leave before their relationship gets worse. After hearing his wife's pleas, Jack finally gives in and agrees to run away with her from the city. Alice doesn't waste time and hurriedly goes to gather at least the essential things. When Alice gets in the car, Jack apologizes to her. Alice doesn't understand what's going on until the men in red uniforms approach the car and forcibly take her away. Jack, hearing his wife's screams and pleas for help, starts crying. Alice is taken to the hospital and treated with strong electric shocks. When her whole body aches, she sees the image of a happy couple again and realizes that the image is connected to her and Jack's life. They're in each other's arms, humming that repetitive song. Jack has lost his job, but Alice says it's fine because she can take another shift at the hospital where she worked as a doctor and work more. Doing full-time work with so much pressure exhausts Alice physically and mentally. She arrives home late. Jack tries to get close to her, but Alice doesn't have the energy for it and rejects him with frustration. Jack sits behind his system and spends the night listening to Frank's podcast, where he offers men a way to find their true selves away from a society that pressures them. Alice wakes up again at the Victory Hospital. Dr. Collins tells her that her problem has been solved and she is cured. Alice has returned to the city and continues her daily life as if nothing happened, becoming the same person she was before. Until one evening, Jack comes home from work and plays the same repetitive song again. Alice remembers many things. It becomes clear that Jack himself requested to be part of the Victory Project. This allowed him access to a special device that was kept at home, and Alice was connected to it 24/7, as her life in Victory was just a simulation. This condition applied to all the women in Victory, and Jack, like the other men, only connected to the device for a few hours. For the rest of the time, his task was to protect Alice's body. To pay for the device's costs, he had to work another job. In Victory, Alice, who had figured out some of the truths, collapses in pain on the ground. She was lost in the images that kept coming to her mind. Alice demands an explanation from Jack. Jack immediately gets defensive and yells that he did it so they could have a perfect life because they were poor and miserable. Alice, sadly, calls her husband a murderer and says she doesn't forgive him for doing this. She was worried about all the other wives and children who were trapped in Victory against their will. Jack explains the children are not real but part of the simulation. Then he kneels and asks for his wife's forgiveness. Tired of her husband's lies, Alice starts hitting Jack with a glass until he dies. She didn't know that dying in Victory meant dying in real life. On the other hand, we see that Jack in the real world opens his eyes and dies. Bunny, hearing the noise from Alice's, enters the house. Alice tries to tell her everything, but Bunny quickly admits that she already knew everything. Her children had died in real life, and choosing the simulation was the only way for her to live with her children. She tells Alice that she needs to go to the headquarters and cut off her connection as Jack can no longer take care of her in the real world. Alice is really scared, but she decides to save herself. As she leaves the house, she sees that all the neighbors have come outside. When the streetlights start exploding, the women realize something. However, the men try to stop Alice. Bunny comes out, shows one of the men, and gives Alice the chance to get in the car and escape just before the red-clad men catch up. As the men get in their cars and chase after her, Alice, despite the heavy atmosphere of the pursuit, manages to leave the city. However, red-clad men start hitting her car on the road. Dr. Collins also joins them. But when Alice finds herself surrounded, she quickly swerves the car off the road, causing Collins and the others crash into each other. Frank hears about Collins' death at home. Shelley also hears that Frank is ordering the men. With hatred, she approaches her husband and kills him with a knife. In the desert, Alice keeps driving and finds the hill, but her car gets stuck in a bad turn. Alice had no intention of giving up. She blocks the road with her car, then gets out and starts running. But the men also get out of their cars and chase after her. Alice had to give it her all. When she reaches the building, she hallucinates that she is holding Jack in her arms, and her husband asks her to stay. At that moment, the men get closer to her. Alice quickly runs toward the wall, places her hands on the glass, and disturbing images flash in her mind again. Suddenly, everything goes black and Alice is gasping for breath.